The world's on fire. Our river's gone dry. The rich are getting richer. They've left us out here to die. Mass migration. We got no place to hide. Who's against us? Who's on our side? Are they too dumb or are they just in on it? Liars and cheaters, a red-hot grip. Ditch the gaslighting gas bag that speaks in code. He's a faker, a shaker, a pontificating pantload. In this house of mirrors, we've hit the wall before it's too late. Let's go. Come on, y'all. It's border to border and coast to coast. It's real, it's facts, and it ain't no hoax. It's Podcast by George, and it's showtime, folks. Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another Podcast by George. Well, I call that my drama intro, and we're going to be talking about drama today because we're going to be talking about the big three on the PBG, climate, war, and healthcare. And we got the guy on the show that follows the money, folks. It's Stephen Semler coming back to Podcast by George. We're going to bring him on here very shortly, but I wanted to start off a little bit by talking about, this house of mirrors. What's going on behind the curtain here, the propaganda that we're getting in the daily news. And you just got to, scratch the veneer a little bit and you can see this stuff. I wanted to bring this article up today just to show this. Now, this is out of the Associated Press. You may be seeing this in your major metropolitan daily because, of course, it's syndicated everywhere, folks. And this reads, Russia claims to have Bakhmut, but top Ukrainian military leaders say the battle is not over. And I highlighted that because we always tend to put these things in terms of, I don't know, maybe like a football game or something. We're talking about war here, folks. And then you see in the highlighted portion down here, and I've got to make this big on screen just for me to be able to see it in studio, big enough for me to read it anyway. It's this fact that this Ukrainian nuclear reactor is at risk. This is behind. We don't talk about this nearly enough. That's big news, folks. We talk about the battle for Bakhmut and who's winning and who's losing like it's a game of chess, but we forget about the nuclear risk here. 20 minutes we could be dead from any kind of a nuclear strike accidentally. 20 minutes everybody in Ukraine could probably be dead, maybe some in Russia as well, depending upon the prevailing winds because of those nuclear reactors. Okay, let's get into this article very briefly before we bring Stephen on. He's in the green room, so we're going to get to that very shortly. Although Russia claims it has won control of Ukraine's eastern city of Bakhmut after a grinding 9-month conflict in which tens of thousands of fighters have died. Now, that's on both sides. Could be like 100,000, maybe more, according to the counts. According to Mark Milley from the Joint Chief of Staff. So, I mean, that's the kind of bodies that we're talking about here, folks. Say Ukrainian military leaders, the battle is not over. And this 9-month grind that they're talking about in Bakhmut, it always reminds me of the fact, again, like Medea Benjamin and the peace activists, right off the top, they were telling us that we needed to negotiate and settle this diplomatically quickly when this thing first broke out, because the longer you wait, the more this body count rises, the less likely you're going to get a resolution anytime soon. And now we've got this horrific circumstance that exists, and it's just making things much more difficult to get this solved. And it's got to get solved or everybody dies. I mean, literally. Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister, Hanna Maliar, said Monday that Ukrainian troops are holding some areas in the southwest outskirts of the city. Wait a minute. Holding some areas in the southwest outskirts of the city? We're talking about the battle for Bakhmut. That sounds to me like game over, folks. If you're out there on the outskirts, that's where you're at. Yeah, the Russians did win there, while the fight for the strategic heights on the northern and southern parts of the suburbs continue. The war is always going to continue. Now, here again, I want to show this because this is from the Associated Press. They've got a photo montage. It's 16 slides, and they're wanting to show you the horror of war. And this is part of the horror when you think about Ukraine, its beautiful cities and its beautiful countryside in particular. It's a beautiful land, folks, but they tend to show the buildings, the damage to the infrastructure. This is what we're seeing to illustrate the horrors of war. That shelling is caused by weapons like this. Now, this is from the embeds on the Ukrainian side. This would be, some kind of a U.S. howitzer, I would think. This is what we're looking at here. And then take a very close look at this. Now, this is out of the same montage, and this is what I'm talking about when it comes to propaganda. This is how they're illustrating the horror of war. You see those guys on the ground? Folks, I play hockey. I've seen people hurt like that playing hockey. That's not the horror of war. The point that I want to make to you here, if you get hit by one of these things, by one of these howitzers, you don't look like that. I don't know what those guys got hit with, but it looks like they got hit with some small arms fire, some rocks, maybe some shrapnel from one of these howitzers from a distance or something like that. Next slide. They show this guy in an infirmary. He's got a bandage on his head, and he looks like he's got damage to his eye. I mean, God love him. You don't want to see anybody get hurt. But here's the point that I'm trying to make. This is not the imagery or the horror of war. Think about Saving Private Ryan. It's like that, only it's real. It's even worse. And I've had this on the show before. Let me get this over here where people can see it. I encourage people to get his book, Chris Hedges. Read his Substack. The Greatest Evil is War. Chris Hedges has a chapter in this book called Corpses, and it's all about a Marine whose job really was to pick up the pieces, literally, and sometimes they're itty-bitty pieces. They don't amount to very much. My God, is it horrific in the theater of war. That's what's left. That's what's left over. Here again, we're seeing the cities, but the horror of war is much worse. It's people blown apart into unrecognizable pieces that they scoop up with a shovel, put in a bag, and return to their family. That's what we need to start seeing. That's how we need to have the horror of war illustrated. All right, so that's my rant here. I got to get that out of the way. I want to take that off the screen. And because I really like this guy. We've had him on the show several times. We're lucky to get him on here. I want to bring him up and bring his graphic in. Steven Semler is the co-founder of SPRI, Security Policy Reform Institute. He follows the money on U.S. foreign and domestic policy topics. He writes for working class, grassroots organizers, and candidates. He says all are welcome, of course. You can learn more about the Security Policy Reform Institute at securityreform.org, and you can follow him on Twitter. And for our people that are listening in audio now, it's Stephen with a PH, Stephen Semler. Semler. I'll have those URLs, those web addresses up as we go through the show. Okay, that took a little while. It always takes longer than I would like, but let's click a button here and bring him on in and say good morning to our good friend, our old buddy, our old pal, Steven Semler. Hi, Steven.
Morning, George.
Yeah, thanks for coming on here, pal. Now, you've been on a roll, and it's been a while since we've had you on the show, and I want to go through some of your and folks, go to Substack. You'll be able to find him there. That's a great place to find Steven Semler. These are some of his posts that have appeared here recently. And I really liked this one here, Budget Battle on Capitol Hill, forecasting the winners and losers. And you do these situations. I really like this. And this was from last week, I think. Yesterday, you said House Republicans advanced a draft of the fiscal year 2024 military construction, veteran affairs, and related agencies funding bill, one of the 12 annual appropriations bills, which I didn't hear anything about. I mean, you got to be looking at this stuff closely like Stephen is to even be aware of this. The legislation would provide $152.5 billion for the VA, $15 billion more than Biden requested, and $18 billion more than the amount enacted for fiscal year 2023. Okay, I know jingoism is really running rampant, Stephen. I mean, support the troops, support the military, but what about these appropriations above and beyond, what Joe Biden is asking for?
So for the last, probably month or month and a half, since the Republicans unveiled this spending proposal that they had to cut federal spending, it's called the Limit, Save, Grow Act, which is, I'm second guessing the name, but it sounds really lame. So that's probably the exact name of the bill. Essentially, the Republicans' goal was to bring spending levels for next year, 2024, down to 2022 levels. Now, federal spending pretty much goes up every single year to account for inflation and also just other things. So what they're doing is the Republicans wanted to just limit the total money amount available to force a choice for Democrats and Joe Biden to say, okay, what would you like funded and what would you like to see cut? Now, since the Republicans unveiled that proposal, Democrats and Biden have been saying, oh, the Republicans are going to cut veteran spending. They're going to cut veterans' healthcare spending. They're going to cut veterans' benefits. So Republicans just came back and they passed this massive veterans spending bill. Now, again, this is just the discretionary budget. There's mandatory spending as well, as my friend Matthew Ho reminded me recently.
Yeah.
So the massive amount you see there is only half the equation for veteran spending. But anyway, regarding just the budget that Congress controls every single year, the discretionary budget, essentially Republicans just passed this massive budget to take away that line of attack. And now you don't see Democrats celebrating this as a win.
Yeah.
You don't see any of them celebrating it as a win, because what it means, and many Democrats have already admitted this, is that because the Republicans have front-loaded this budget with so much money for veterans, it means there has to be a cut to something else. Because again, we're probably going to see a reduction in spending from 2024 to 2022 levels or something like that. McCarthy, the House Republican leader, House Speaker, is meeting with Joe Biden today to discuss a deal. So essentially, Republicans did a really smart thing here, and not only took away a line of attack, but also just said, okay, great. Okay, we don't want to cut veteran spending either. So now take your choice of the social spending you want to cut.
Yeah, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy politically, because, man, you can really slap yourself on the back. You can thump your chest over supporting the Trumps, supporting the troops above and beyond what even Joe Biden has asked for. It's like a competition here. I wanted to bring this up on the screen too, because this shows a little bit more of what you're talking about. Let me make sure I've got the right button clicked here. It should be, where am I? Okay, there we go. This will bring it back up. Now, Stephen says the reason you don't see many Democrats celebrating the VA's budget boost and why all Democrats of the subcommittee voted against the bill is because it's effectively a guarantee, a significant cut of all social programs, not means tested by military participation. Why? Because a reduction in overall federal spending now looks like likely to be paired with legislation to raise the debt limit. And Biden has already ruled out trimming Pentagon funding. My God, no, we'd never want to do that. But I've got some stats here from Stephen, which are just mind-boggling, coming up a little later in the show, which eats far more of the annual discretionary budget for the VA and every other cabinet department. Okay, so this is where, speaking security really shines. It's with these charts and it's with these graphs. And I wanted people to take a look at this because it's what I headlined the show about. This is more Americans facing financial hardship in 2023 than in 2020. Now, Stephen, I got friends and relatives and people that watch my show. They're bitching all the time about the economy, about how it's hitting them hard. And they're kind of perplexed as to why they're not seeing or hearing any reporting on this in the mainstream media. It's if it doesn't exist, but you've dug into this a little bit and it does exist. And that's what this chart illustrates.
Right. So oftentimes you hear about the health of the economy, and the economy is the health of the economy is often equated in the mainstream media and by politicians as the same thing as the health of the population, when that's obviously not true. So you saw, like, post 2008, you saw the economy eventually start to recover, but a lot of people were left behind in that recovery. So that's why what I wanted to do here, because a similar narrative has emerged, quote unquote, post COVID, even though, people I know well and somewhat well, and people I join, for conversations from time to time, are still get COVID, so the narrative was that, oh, the economy's fine, everyone's doing okay. But I looked at the numbers, and these numbers come from the Census Bureau. God bless the Census Bureau.
Yeah.
Who does like really impressive research. I looked at hunger too, and a similar trend. It was the same deal. I mean, people are worse off than they were now, and than they were in 2020. So what I looked at was this. It's called the Household Pulse Survey, which started early on in the pandemic, and I think ends shortly. I think this is like their second or third to last survey that they run, but they polled these households. And what I did is that I compared the results from 2020 to 2021 to 2022 to 2023, and just took 2020 and 2023. and found that, yeah, about almost 10 million Americans are having trouble paying the bills than they were in 2020, which is ghastly because things were
Yeah.
terrible in 2020.
Yeah, 10 million more. I want to have bring this up big again so people can see this. We're talking about a country that has what we're a little over 300 million now. This is 90 million Americans facing financial hardship. And this isn't a political thing or a pollster that's asking this. They're reporting this via the census. So it gives it a little additional veracity. It was 80 million. And in the course of just 1 year, it's gone up that much. And think about all the money that we just talked about that's being spent in other ways in the war, primarily for the military industrial complex, the might, the blob, whatever you want to call it. And my God, 10 million Americans, as Stephen says, more than just last year, are really having a tough time making ends meet, if they're making it meet at all. They're just going further into debt, more likely, Stephen.
That's right. That's right. So one just small correction or clarification, I should say, that this only refers to adults.
Oh.
So these are it was a household survey.
Oh, yeah,
Then
sure.
adults are calculated. So if you look at this, you could say 90 million is a ton of people either way, but this is just adults.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to account for children, you would take the percentage of adults who reported financial hardship, which is close to 40%. And then you would take 40% or 0.4 times the total US population, whatever is 300 or 350 million or whatever. And you get a number much higher than 90 million. So this is just adults. But it does give you an accurate idea of like, yeah, there's a ton of households out there, close to 40% that are having trouble facing financial hardship. And this isn't just over the past year. The question is on the survey, have you had somewhat or very difficult time paying for basic expenses, just basic expenses, not discretionary, vacations or whatever, basic household expenses over the last 7 days, just 7 days. So if it was over a month, that number will be way higher. If it was a year, also way higher if it included children. And I'm not sure how retirees are calculated, but I don't think they're included in this number either. But what you'd want to do if you want the actual number to estimate essentially the number of Americans that are in financial hardship, you just take 40% times whatever the population is. So things are getting a lot worse. And the tragic thing is, like, I'll have a newsletter on this soon, is that this is just a bar chart or a column chart comparing 2020 to 2023.
Yeah.
I tracked it, every survey that the census did from spring 2020 till now, as a line chart also that I'm going to release soon too. And the tragic thing is that once Biden got into office and they passed the American Rescue Plan, and the child tax credit was included in there. A boost to unemployment insurance was included in there. There's an eviction moratorium, I think, in there as well. Plus the stimulus checks. You actually saw a decline,
Sure,
in the number of Americans facing financial hardship. And then the most depressing thing I've done in the last week is I've tracked when each one of these things, these kind of mini temporary welfare states things have expired. And you can see the amount of financial hardship increase with each one. So it's a preview for what I'm doing now. Is I'm working on a bit of legislation that would bring back another round of the $600 stimulus checks. If you compare, I'll have this analysis out soon, and you'll see it, George. But if you compare the surveys that took place a week on either side of the release of the $600 stimulus checks that were in January 2021, you see close to a 9 million decrease in the number of people facing financial hardship, and a 6 million decrease in the number of people who didn't have enough to eat in the last week. So you see, like, these advanced tax refunds, they did wonders. And of course, Biden's first stimulus checks, shorted us $600. And if he wanted to make up for it now, if you wanted to actually, rally Congress and rally the general public to have another round of these things, he could actually improve the numbers pretty much immediately that you saw in that graph. So it's a sad state of affairs. And now I think now with Biden meeting GOP leaders in the White House this evening, you'll see a lot of collusion going on. Because again, Democrats could have fixed the debt limit during the lame duck session, meaning after they knew they were going to lose the House in November, up until the new Congress came in January. They had all that time to fix the debt limit, but Chuck Schumer and Democratic leadership refused to. So now we're in a situation where we have all these theatrics around the debt ceiling, where Republicans are going to Biden and saying, look, we're going to hold the economy hostage with this debt ceiling thing unless you make cuts, unless you make spending cuts. And Democrats knew that was going to happen, but my opinion is that they wanted to make the cuts anyway, and they wanted to just pass off the blame on the Republicans. Because you look at Biden's rhetoric, he's talking about cutting the deficit more than ever. His deficit dogmatism is back. So I think that's the one thing to keep an eye out for, is that like the spending cuts that the GOP is demanding, all of them are an extension of what Democrats have already been doing over the past year. So that's, I think, the necessary context.
Yeah, it is great context. And just listening to you talk there, I'm thinking about that American Rescue Plan, the CARES Act. My bitch about that from the very beginning was they didn't give it directly to the people. A very small amount. You mentioned the wonderful things that could be done with $600. My God, offset that with the horrible things that are being done with this military spending. I mean, people, bringing soldiers home with, their faces in a bucket, for God's sake. That's what we're talking about with the military spending. And the Rescue Act, or whatever it's called, I can't even think of what it's named, but that was passed down. Like we've got a Republican governor here in Iowa, Stephen, who's sitting on it. I mean, still hasn't allocated the money, hasn't dispersed it, hasn't given it to people that need it. And you talk about the people that in these in the census survey that are reporting a difficult time making necessities. Yeah, and you mentioned it. It's food. I mean, the main bitch really usually is gasoline. What I'm hearing a lot, just stuff at the grocery stores. I mean, and the kids that you mentioned that weren't included in that survey. The statistics, the surveys of the number of American children going to bed hungry every night is jaw-dropping. I mean, it really hits you upside the head when you start looking at this stuff. So I'm glad you're looking into this and making people aware of not only where the money's being spent, but where it's not being spent. It's just as important, maybe more so.
That's right. And my wager is that, Biden refuses to cut the military budget. It's going to, the House and Senate Armed Services haven't put out a number with the amount they're seeking. But it's clear that's going to be even more than the increase Biden requested, and it would just look extremely bad to do it now during the debt ceiling negotiations. So they're just going to keep it under wraps. But we're getting close to just the Pentagon budget, if you include like Homeland Security funding, and State Department military aid programs, supplemental military aid for Ukraine and other countries, then you're getting closer to $1 trillion. But point is, a massive number is going to be put in the Pentagon, and they say it's necessary for our security. I don't think it is, in part because I think if you have a budget that large, you're doing some very unseemly things in the world, and you're going to see blowback for those things. I mean, that's the scale of the Pentagon spending now. That tells you that something terribly wrong has happened. So they say it's in the name of security. I don't know. I think you could cut $140 billion and have a redux of those $600 checks.
Yeah. Well, and just look at some of the charts, some of the graphs, some of the stats that we're looking at. I tell people all the time, do you feel safer than you did last year? The military spending has increased hugely. Do you feel that much more safe realistically? And even if realistically, you might be more safe, which I don't think you are. Stephen just said that. Mentally, psychologically, hell, we're scared to death. I mean, we're running to blow people up around the world. We're afraid that they're coming to get us, folks. There are people that won't go to the get and go without a pistol packed in their pants. I mean, that's the America that we're living in. So realistically or otherwise, we're not more safe. We're more fearful. And I wanted to bring this up to get to your next article, because this is another head shaker. I look at this and I go, what the hell? U.S. accounts for nearly 40% of global military spending. Folks, the world's a big place, literally. And the U.S. is accounting for nearly 40% of all the global military spending, according to Stephen. Now, these highlights are mine. New research by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute finds that global military spending reached $2.3 trillion in 2022, a 3.7% increase over 2021. European expenditure shot up 13%. I started to read that, Stephen, and I'm going, well, okay, we're talking about the Ukraine war here, the biggest year-to-year increase since the end of the Cold War. The usual suspects are the reason why military spending has grown in real terms every year since 2015, particularly the one responsible for every 39% of the world total last year. And you're showing this, and I wanted to get to that chart, but let's go back here to this. I highlighted that the usual suspects. Tell us what we're talking about here.
Definitely the United States,
Yeah.
for one. But then, in the past, like 2 to 5 years or close to that, China has been one of those countries that has been boosting its military spending. But the jump year to year from 21 to 22 with China really wasn't that big. It was like, I'm not even sure if it was an increase when you account for inflation. But India, Saudi Arabia, Japan, for sure, they all increased their military spending. But again, I mean, like in order for Japan, for example, to meet to match the United States, it would have to increase it like 20 times, like 15
Well,
or
yeah,
20
look at the
times.
chart there, folks. If you're watching this in video, now, again, if you're listening in audio, you can't see the graph, but the United States spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined. Here's everybody next to us. China, oh my God, everybody's scared to death of China. Well, compare what they're spending to us. Russia, and then up there towards the top, Stephen's talking about Japan. Look at the little amount that they're spending. They'd have to spend 20 times what they're spending to reach what we spend.
Right. And one thing I would have done different with this graph, George, is I would have highlighted which ones are U.S. allies.
Sure, NATO is part of this. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, in this chart for listeners, you have 68 billion for UK, 56 for Germany, 54 for France. Those are all NATO countries. We have an alliance with Japan. That's 46 billion. We're subsidizing Ukraine's military at the moment. That's 44 billion. India, I think we have some sort of agreement with them, or we're on fairly good terms because we view them as a counterweight to China. Russia's military spending obviously has gone up, but the 86 billion there is I mean, that's really not a lot of money.
No, that
And if you look
surprised
at
me.
it,
Yeah.
and if you look at their performance in Ukraine, it hasn't been good. I mean, again, this is war, as you mentioned in that opening segment you had. This is going to be devastating. If you looked at Russian behavior in Syria, for example, they will bomb hospitals, civilian infrastructure just as readily as Bashar al-Assad did. So it's really important to end this war as quickly as possible. And another benefit of ending this war as quickly as possible is that the only type of war that the U.S. can lose to Russia in is a nuclear exchange, because they have as much or more nuclear weapons than we have. And, going back to it, I thought that, when Putin amassed his troops on the border there in February 2022, sorry, I thought that would, I think I was like one of maybe probably the only person who is viewing it as an opportunity for Biden to reach out and really aggressively pursue peace talks, because obviously this Ukraine thing has been a massive issue for Russia, not just for Putin, but for since the end of the Cold War, about Ukraine's alignment with the West and territories therein. And I thought there would be a really good opportunity in that moment of crisis before all hell broke loose, for Biden and Putin to meet really aggressively, iron out details about Ukraine's relationship with NATO, regarding implementation of the START treaty, or any sort of mutual nuclear reduction treaty. I thought there was really an opportunity for diplomatic breakthrough in that moment of crisis when the world was watching, but there wasn't one. So now we just have to figure out a way to kind of work our way backwards and say, okay, how do we not only just do the bare minimum in this conflict in terms of getting a ceasefire, but also getting U.S. Russia diplomatically getting that relationship repaired again, where we can at least do the bare minimum in terms of yearly reduction of nuclear weapon stockpiles. Because again, it's a nuclear exchange isn't going to happen because someone actively decided to. It's going to happen because there was a misconception about what was actually happening. They got a false
Yes.
signal. There was militant discourse. People really thought that it was on when it actually wasn't. It's going to be a dumb mistake. It's going to
Which
be
it makes it more
yeah.
likely, to my
Yes.
mind. Yeah.
Yes.
So, all right, Stephen mentioned the great Matthew Ho, who was on my show here just a week or so ago, talking about he mentioned again that according to the latest analyses, our greatest exports as a country here in the United States, oil and weapons. Agriculture is third. Yeah. And so here we go. I mean, this is out of Speaking Security. Here's the numbers. Here's the charts and the graphs. The U.S. sold weapons to 57% of the world's autocracies in 2022. Again, what in the hell? I do a head snap here. These findings, Stephen writes, fly in the face of Biden's preferred framing of international politics as a battle between democracies and autocracies, a narrative that lends itself more to a self-righteous foreign policy than an honest or productive one, dividing the world between democratic and autocratic countries in the spirit of with us or against us. I don't know. That goes back to Bush or somebody. My God, these analogies are stupid. Again, we're reducing this to like a football game, high school stuff, it seems like. Makes conflict more likely and has had a chilling effect on calls for diplomacy and detente. It's also harder to cooperate with the international community while insisting you're locked in an existential fight with roughly half of them. All right, and we got to let Stephen go here pretty soon. He's very busy, but this is an example of what he's doing here. This is it appeared in the Intercept, a graph, a chart put together there. U.S. sold weapons to 57% of the world's autocracies in 2022. I just build on this, elaborate a little bit, Stephen.
So essentially, I have a problem with that narrative that Biden's using, where he's characterizing international relations as this existential fight between democratic and autocratic forces, with the U.S. on the side of the former. It just seems it's just incredibly self-righteous, and I use self-righteous, seriously here in its literal form, as in terms of not only the moral superiority, but the mistaken sense of moral superiority, with the intent of misleading others. And this is exactly what's happening. I mean, if you really believe that international relations is about that democratic autocratic clash, you wouldn't sell weapons to damn near 2/3 of autocratic countries. And this is only sales. If you looked at military aid, which I'm doing now, and I definitely wouldn't recommend you don't, because it's a pain in the ass. If you do that, my guess is I haven't made my way through all the data yet, but for sure you would find that the U.S. is either selling weapons to or providing military equipment or weapons to via grants, via the taxpayer.
Giving it to them, yeah.
Yeah, you would find that number is probably closer to 80% of all autocratic countries. Now, again, I mean, I don't like these labels between autocratic and democratic countries. I think they just make me feel uneasy in a lot of ways. But the way I justified it in my head was, look, it's these categorizations may make me feel uneasy, but not nearly as uneasy as Biden's sort of holier than thou, Bush-esque cosmic struggle discourse, which I just absolutely loathe. And it does. And I'll say this: this chart is based on the Varieties of Democracy Index, which is just some sort of based in Sweden. It categorizes countries based on their political system through a variety of means. It doesn't matter which one you use. So I looked at Freedom Houses too. I looked at another one whose name I can't remember, and another one too whose name I also can't remember. But it doesn't matter which index you use. You'll always find that it's somewhere around this number, more than half, upwards to 3/4 of countries, depending on which index you use to categorize democracies from autocracies. So what I'm saying is, like, this is irrefutable empirical evidence against Biden's narrative, which I hope will lead to a wider dismissal of the narrative, because it's really not useful in any way.
You know what I tell people all the time, and this goes way back with me, but I tell people, and these charts and graphs and these statistics, this is what you got to frame your argument with. This is how you've got to look at things. I tell people, don't tell me what you think. Don't tell me what you believe. Don't tell me what you feel. I don't care about any of that stuff. Tell me this kind of stuff. And most importantly, now in the era of social media and the internet and that type of thing, sure as hell don't tell me what you like. I don't care what you like. It doesn't make any difference if you like it or not. Hell, I don't like this, but it's a fact, folks. Now, okay, so here we're getting into this, the meat of this a little bit that Stephen was talking about. In Biden's first full fiscal year as president, weapons sales from the United States to other countries reached $206 billion. Now, here, listen closely, folks. According to the State Department's annual tally, which uses an opaque but seemingly broader accounting of yearly FMS and DCS figures, Biden's first year total surpasses the Trump era high of $192 billion. And I just got a message today, people bitching about Trump, what he did. Well, okay, look at this, 206 billion compared to 192 billion and heading north, folks. The multi-billion-dollar effort to train and equip Ukraine doesn't fully explain the dramatic rise in total arms sales last year, let alone to autocracies. Okay, and I mentioned that earlier when I was looking at that one chart or that one graph. You would think that this was a Ukraine phenomenon, but no, this is a trend, and worst of all, Stephen, it's a long-term trend.
Right, and that's the Trump era high for that 192 figure. During an administration that set records in terms of arms sales. So you hear talk about, in the Trump administration, all liberals talked about was not normalizing Trump. But here you have Biden not only normalizing arms sales, not only normalizing nuclear brinkmanship, normalizing record high arms sales. I mean, where does it end? I mean, and the people who say, but Trump did it. Since when is that our metric or our barometer for sound foreign policy? So I just don't really get that argument at all. But I really think it's I really think, Cavi, I agree with you. I think these numbers are important. And I'm not just saying because I did this, it took forever and I have a proprietary interest in saying it's important. I wouldn't have done it if I didn't think it was necessary. And, tons of people are saying, yeah, duh, of course the US sells for them, but it's important to have, in order to be taken seriously, if these people care about that, it's important to have an empirical number to back up your seemingly obvious statement. The best compliment I received was, I assumed this was the case, but I was looking for these numbers and now I have them. So there you go. Like a lot of my research is doing the obvious. So people, going back to that green chart we had about the difficulty in paying the bills, people know that because they're having difficulty paying the bills. But it's not until you have data in front of you saying, okay, yeah, I am right to feel this way, and I'm not the only one. And now I have a specific point I can refer to when making this argument to my congressperson or my neighbor Dave or whoever,
Okay, I went to mute there. I was going to say, don't accept the argument that how are we going to afford it? I mean, Biden has used that before, talking about Medicare for all, that we can't afford these things in this country. And I'm sensitive to that argument. I mean, I'm receptive to it. All the things in this country that we can't, the nice things that we can't have. Medicare for all is a classic example. Addressing the climate change so that we all survive would be another one. The infrastructure, supporting kids and all of these types of things. But the overarching thing for me, Stephen, is not only are we not getting those things, it's what we are getting. We're getting this blood in a bucket that I'm talking about, this war on the other side. My God, let's stop spending the money on that. At the very least, to keep people alive. It's an equation. It's mathematical. I mean, you can look at it in graph and charts, but that's the long and the short of it. What do you want your government to do as an American? Do you want us to help ourselves and to help people around the world like China the nefarious China has been doing with its Road and Belt Initiative? Or are you wanting to blow the shit out of people? I mean, to commit these wars, to assist in a genocide in Yemen, to cause 6 million civilian deaths in the Middle East since 9/11. Some of those estimates are there. That's what we're doing. That's who we are. And we are all a part of it. I'm talking about U.S. citizens. And the worst part of it is, and I started off talking about, looking behind the curtain and propaganda, lots of people are completely unaware of it. But I got to say, Stephen, you're doing your part in having us look at Oz behind the curtain here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you having me on to talk about the findings.
Yeah. Well, we're going to continue to follow along. We'll have Stephen back here very closely. But I'd like to give you a last word, Stephen. You're good at it. We've shown some of the most recent articles, and I'll put the graphic up with the, here's the, I can put this up right now. This is the StephenSemler.substack.com. Now, that's an excellent place to go. And, of course, you're on Twitter at Stephen Semler. Again, people listening in audio, it's Stephen with a PH. Semler, Semler. But give us a close here. Wrap this one up, Stephen.
Feel free to always write me for suggestions and things you want me to look at. And also just don't forget to use the materials I make for your own creative work or for your own political engagement. That's what they're there for. So thankful for George, as always, for having me on and promoting the work, and keep listening.
Yeah, we've got a late comment coming in here. I want to get this on. This is from the great Mary Knox. God, she's good. I mean, and we were talking about these autocracies. Excellent point. I was talking about Medicare for all and healthcare, Stephen. She says, most of the countries we aid have healthcare. We don't. We can't afford it. The aid that those military aid, we're giving them bombs and missiles and howitzers and weapons and stuff like that. A lot of these autocracies have Medicare for all, provide this type of healthcare for their citizenry, but we don't. That's an excellent point, not to be missed, Stephen.
No, that's a tremendous point. That's a terrific point. Pretty odd that falls out of Biden's discourse immediately when he talks about, when he's going on about all these autocracies.
Yeah. Well, stay tuned. That's a great way to leave it. I like to refer to Mary Knox as my associate producer or something. I mean, she's always got great questions. We'll circle back here. Again, thanks for coming on this podcast by George Live Line, Stephen.
All right. Thanks.
We'll see you soon, friend. All right, pal. And folks, I'm going to leave it with this like I always do. If you like podcastbygeorge.com, if you like getting this type of insight and knowledge to make you a more informed and, I believe, a better world citizen, go to podcastbygeorge.com. Click a platform. Choose where you want to see us. Facebook and YouTube. You can sign up very easily on both of those platforms. On YouTube, ring that notification bell. Leave us a comment on Facebook. Follow us there, of course. But if you just like the audio of these long form, they're kind of live stream / podcasts. You just like the audio, click the icon for iTunes or Spotify, the iHeart Radio app, Deezer, Stitcher. Even I think Amazon Music is on there. There's a lot of places you can follow Podcast by George in audio. But that's going to do it, folks. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.